Stage 16, Jayville Out. This is 4.43 miles. And the second time. And we're running a bit late. It is 6:54. And it's sort of, sunsets at 7, which is 6 minutes. So we have just enough time to finish this stage before sunset. But it's pretty dusky. It's not really a good line here. Hey,
How are you?
doing well. No, I wasn't saying for you. I was just saying for the folks watching at home.
Go.
Thank you.
All right, you guys have
Yep.
a good time. I'm done?
Yeah. Armed. This is a 100 left 4 plus. Right 4 short over crest 15. 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go! Left 4 plus late. Into right 4 short over crest 30. Right 3 plus no cut. Left 4 over small crest. Right 4 long. Left 4 plus short over small crest. Right 5. Into small crest, into left 4 plus. 50. Right 5. Into small jump 30. Left 3 plus, very long. Into small crest, into right 3 minus over small crest. Into left 5 minus short. Into small crest, into left 4 minus. 50, caution right 4 minus, tightens 3 minus over kick. Into left 3 plus over crest. Into right 4 plus over crest. Down, long, tightens, opens over jump. 70, left 4 plus. Nice to jump. Left 4 plus again. Right 5 minus short over small crest. Left 3 plus no cut over crest. Into right 5 minus no cut. Left 5 minus. Into right 4 plus short. Left 5 short. Into turn right 4 short. Into left 5 short 30. Right 4 minus. Into left 6 plus crest. Into left 4 minus over small crest. Long over small crest. Into right 3 no cut. Here's your right 3 no cuts. 70. Left 5 plus. Into right 5 plus over small crest. Into double caution, left 5 short over jump, tightens 3. Repeat, tightens 3. Into right 4 minus over bridge. 50, left 4 minus over long crest opens. 30, right 3 minus long. Into
Right 3?
left, yes, 3 minus. Long, into left 3 minus long. 150. Right 4 plus long, opens over crest 100. Left 6 plus. Into right 4 plus 50. Left 6 plus. Into small crest, into right 6, 120. Right 5 minus. left 5 plus long. Keep going. Right 6 very long over small crest 50. This was right 6 very long over small crest 50. Left 4. Keep going, keep going. 30. Right 5 plus very long. Tightens 4 minus onto tarmac over bridge. Repeat, 5 plus very long. Tightens 4 minus onto tarmac onto bridge. Into left 5 over small crest over bumps. Into right 5 plus onto dirt 70. Stay right over small crest 30. Left 4 plus long. Tightens 4 minus over crest 30. Small crest into right 3 plus, no cut long. Repeat, right 3 plus, no cut long. Stay left over small crest 30. Right 3 minus, no cut long. Into small crest. Into left 5, tightens 3 minus. Right 4 plus long. Over crest. Right 6 over small crest. Into left 3 very long. Right 3 opens long over small crest. Into jump 30. Right 6 plus no cut. Into left 6 plus. Into right 6 plus. Into left 6 plus over small crest 30. Caution right 3 plus over crest. There's your caution right 3 plus over crest. Into left 4 plus long, opens 50. Left 5 plus long, 30. Small crest, right 4 plus. Into left 4. Small crest 30, left 5, 70. Left 5 minus. Into right 3 plus, tightens. Repeat, right 3 plus, tightens. Into left 5 plus, 180. Left 5 minus over crest, 70. Stay left over crest over finish, 70. Left 5 plus. Into crest. Into left 5 short, narrow down. Good job. You broke before the end. Oh, and it's 7:02. So technically we're 2 minutes past sundown.